My story began in a small town, far from the bustling cities, where I spent my childhood dreaming of making it big in the tech world. Fascinated by gadgets and gizmos, I always believed technology could make life easier. After finishing college, I worked tirelessly to build a startup that specialized in cutting-edge surveillance systems. The company flourished, and our first significant contract with a major security firm marked the beginning of many lucrative ventures. As my career took off, I met Emily at a business conference. She was a charming financial analyst with a contagious laugh, and we quickly fell in love. We got married within a year, and our daughter Lily was born 2 years later, bringing immense joy into our lives. However, as my business demands grew, I failed to notice the widening gap between Emily and me. The reality hit hard after our divorce, leaving me caring for our 3-year-old daughter alone. I had been too focused on work to see the signs. The wake-up call came at my grandfather's funeral after his sudden heart attack. The day after, I packed our bags to leave my mom's house. As I secured Lily in her car seat, I asked, "Do you want to take off your shoes, sweetie?" Her predictable "yes, please" always made me smile. I unbuckled her tiny sneakers and, knowing her preference, took off her socks. With her toes wiggling in relief, I tickled her feet, making her giggle, a little game we cherished. It struck me how much these moments meant to both of us, something I hadn't felt with Emily for a long time. Before I could get lost in thought, Lily interrupted. "Daddy?" she asked as I placed her shoes on the seat beside her, neatly tucking the socks inside. "What is it, Pumpkin?" I asked, looking into her eyes when she hesitated. "Why doesn't Mommy love us anymore?" she asked, with heartbreaking innocence. I was momentarily speechless. "Honey, your mommy loves you very much," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She just couldn't be here today." A brief smile flickered on her face but quickly faded. "But she didn't want to say goodbye to Grandpa," she said softly. I repeated what Emily had told me. "She had to work, sweetheart," I explained. I thought about mentioning the big project Emily was handling, but it was too complicated for a 3-year-old. "Mommy will be home when we get back," I assured her. "She'll be waiting for you." "Does she have to work at night too?" Lily asked, her little face full of concern. I hesitated, then answered, "No, baby girl. I think Mommy's almost finished with her big project. She'll have more time for us soon." The conversation was getting too painful, so I buckled her in, kissed her forehead, and closed the car door. 20 minutes later, Lily was asleep in the back seat as I drove down the highway. Her sad question replayed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were worse than I realized. Emily had hinted at it the last time I asked why she went out so often. We arrived home as the sun was setting. Emily was indeed home. Lily ran upstairs, eager to tell her mom about meeting new cousins. I followed, my mind clouded with dark thoughts from the drive. Why was Emily spending so much time at work or out with her friends? I found her at her vanity, applying makeup in her underwear. She greeted me with a peck on the cheek, and I realized it had been ages since we'd shared a passionate kiss. I sat on the bed watching Lily try to talk to Emily, who barely responded. Even Lily noticed and eventually retreated to her room. Emily continued fixing her hair and makeup. "What's going on, Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My stomach churned with anxiety. "What do you mean?" she replied, focused on her mascara. "We've been home 10 minutes and you're already heading out," I said a bit sharply. She paused, looking at me with mild irritation. "Honey, you know I go out with the girls on Fridays," she said, sounding exasperated. "Actually," I replied, "you go out on Saturdays, some Sundays, most Wednesdays, and nearly every Friday. It's like one endless night out." Lily had gone to her room, and I closed our bedroom door. Turning back, I saw Emily standing, looking at me blankly. I stepped closer, taking her hands. "Emily," I said, my voice shaky, "Lily asked me why you don't love us anymore. I have to ask the same question." Emily's eyes narrowed, a sign IDD hit a nerve, but I pressed on. "Do you still love me?" I asked. She didn't respond immediately, then softened and leaned against me. "Of course, darling," she said softly, "I love you more than ever." But her words felt hollow. She seemed content, but not with us. "Then stay home tonight, please," I pleaded. Emily sighed, patting my chest. "We can put Lily to bed early," I suggested. "Open a bottle of wine, and you can wear that dress I bought you for our anniversary." Her body language agreed until I mentioned the dress. Then she stiffened and tried to pull away. I held her wrist gently but firmly. "Emily, I asked if you're cheating on me." I watched Emily intently, noticing a subtle flicker in her eyes and a slight tension around her mouth. Her pulse quickened beneath my touch, hinting at something she was hiding. "Don't be absurd," she protested. "I could never love anyone but you." She leaned in, planting a kiss on my neck, careful not to disturb her meticulously styled hair. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Emily patted my arm and glanced at the clock. "I'm going to be late," she said. "I promised the girls I wouldn't be. Maybe we can have some time tomorrow night." "Emily, we need to focus on us," I replied, my frustration bubbling up. "Tell them you will catch up another time and stay with us tonight, please." She pulled away, heading to the closet to grab a short skirt. "I can let all my friends down," she retorted. "Why would you want to let me and Lily down?" I shot back. "Don't we matter anymore?" Her eyes narrowed with irritation. "I told you tomorrow," she snapped. "I am entitled to some time for myself without you suffocating me. I am not your property." Our argument escalated. Emily insisted she was an independent individual in our marriage and needed space to relax after work. I reminded her that she had always had plenty of freedom, pointing out that I never complained when she returned to work after Lily was born. I supported her career and was proud of her accomplishments, even though my income alone was sufficient for us to live comfortably. But I couldn't grasp why her job and nights out seemed more important than our family. I made a snide comment about her girls' nights, which only fueled her anger. She demanded to know what I was accusing her of, and I stormed off before saying something I might regret. I went downstairs to cool off on the couch, wrestling with the desire to stop her from leaving, but knowing it would only make things worse. When she finally came downstairs, I had calmed down. We exchanged looks. Hers was defiant, mine was conflicted. "Emily," I said, my voice heavy with emotion, "please don't do this." She hesitated at the door, then opened it. "Emily," I repeated more firmly, "I love you. Please don't you do this to me and Lily." She glanced back at me, her expression unreadable, then stepped out and closed the door behind her. Lily came running downstairs, opening the door to watch her mother's car drive away. She closed the door, hurried to the couch, climbed up next to me, and stared at the door, hoping Emily would come back. After a moment, she crawled into my lap, and we hugged in silence. Then I took her to the kitchen to make sandwiches. The rest of the weekend was tense. Emily came home early Saturday morning, clearly suffering from a hangover. After enduring her irritable mood, Lily and I went to the park and stayed out until dinner. Emily was furious, accusing us of abandoning her. "You brought this on yourself by going out and abandoning Lily," I said. "Get used to us spending time together without you. Deal with it or keep quiet." Emily was shocked by my tone and stayed silent, focusing on Lily for the rest of the evening. That night I tried to reconnect, but Emily's upset stomach cut things short. The following night she was completely unresponsive, and I ended up taking a long shower to cool off. On Monday I left the house before Emily woke up, leaving her to manage Lily's morning routine, which she disliked. Before leaving, I activated some surveillance equipment in the basement that recorded all phone calls and intercepted cell signals within 150 feet. This wasn't strictly legal, but I needed peace of mind. Surveillance cameras were already installed in most rooms to monitor babysitters and the housekeeper. We trusted them, but followed a trust but verify approach. I realized we hadn't needed a babysitter for months, and questioned whether the expensive system was still necessary. I drove into the secured compound surrounding our office building, the high fence topped with razor wire, a constant reminder of the precautions we'd taken after securing our first major security contract 3 years ago. I parked and sat in the car, torn between my gut feeling that Emily was unfaithful and my lack of concrete evidence. Seeing Alex Johnson, one of my earliest hires, snapped me out of my thoughts. I greeted him, grabbed my tablet and briefcase, and glanced at the company logo on the wall, Archer Security Solutions. That's me, Mark Archer, CEO and president of a small but thriving business. We started as a manufacturer of specialty tools 12 years ago and found a niche in producing motor mounts for security cameras. We built a reputation for quality surveillance gear among private investigators. 8 years ago, we acquired a company specializing in compact high-resolution cameras and began offering complete surveillance packages across the country and online. We later acquired several private investigation firms, creating a division called Secure Site Associates, and opened offices in 3 additional cities. Archer Security Solutions was doing well but kept a low profile, which suited me just fine. I was signing routine documents, a task usually handled by my efficient office manager, Maggie. I often joked with her, calling her Radar, to which she quipped back with something about Colonel Potter. Maggie was indispensable. She kept the office running smoothly. To keep her from retiring, I paid her a salary on par with our vice presidents, a fact she knew, but they didn't. As she brought me my first coffee of the day, I said, "Maggie, could you ask Carl Winters to come see me?" "Sure," she replied, looking curious. "Can I ask why?" I hesitated, then decided to be a bit more open. Maggie had been like a second mother to me since the early days in our cramped, renovated warehouse. "Just tell him I need to discuss some private matters," I said, avoiding eye contact. She paused, then softly said, "I am so sorry, Mark," and left quickly. I wondered what she had sensed. Carl headed our surveillance and investigations division, and Maggie understood my request without needing more details. Carl walked in, closing the door behind him as I motioned him to sit. He sipped his tea while I struggled to find the words. "Carl, I think Emily might be involved in something she'll regret," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "Ah, Mark, that is tough," he responded, looking dejected. We both took a deep breath. Carl set his mug down, staring at his fingernails. "Well," he said after a pause, "we have everything we need to find out. I'll bring in some temps to free up our best guys. Can you provide her work schedule, cell number, computer logins, credit card details, stuff like that?" I nodded, initially reluctant to involve our in-house team, but Carl made it clear he wanted the best on the case. I pulled my briefcase closer, having spent Sunday gathering all of Emily's account numbers and other necessary information. I had Carl set me up as a paying customer of Information and Surveillance Associates, using my personal checking account to keep things discreet. We discussed tracking my wife where she went, who she was with, and what they did. I felt guilty but realized it was necessary. If Emily wasn't hurting our marriage, she'd never know about the surveillance. Maybe we could even see a counselor, but if she was unfaithful, I had to know. By noon, Carl's team had bugged Emily's car at her downtown office using my spare key since my name was on the title. They installed a microphone under the driver's seat with a limited range and a GPS tracker in the trunk. Carl assigned his top agents and rented 5 vehicles to avoid detection. He also hired a freelancer to start working at Emily's accounting firm the following week. Carl advised me to act normally around Emily and promised to update me at crucial moments. That night I called Carl from the basement after listening to some phone intercepts illegal, but necessary for my peace of mind. Carl answered on the second ring. "Carl," I began, my voice thick with emotion. "What has happened?" he asked, concerned. I took a deep breath. "You know the intercepts we set up in the house?" I asked. "Yeah. Sorry we couldn't set up remote monitoring today," he replied. "No worries, Carl. There is only so much time in a day. Anyway, I recorded a conversation between Emily and a guy named Brian around 7 p.m. He talked about, well, screwing Emily's brains out again soon. My voice wavered, and I felt a numbness spread through my body. Emily was having an affair, and I couldn't understand why. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Anyway, Carl, this changes our focus. I am calling Pete tomorrow to start the divorce process. We need to gather all the evidence we can." Pete was Peter Robinson, our company lawyer, and my personal attorney. "Yeah, Mark, I am sorry," Carl said slowly. "I don't have the words to express how sorry I am." "Thanks, Carl," I replied, feeling a bit steadier. "But it's on Emily. My daughter and I are the ones suffering here, and I don't understand why she did this." I refocused. "Okay, we are working in a different direction now. I'll see you at the office tomorrow morning." "Sure, Mark," he agreed. "Hey, take it easy tonight, okay?" Done to do anything you'll regret, he added earnestly, warning me not to retaliate against Emily. I'm okay, Carl, I said. I listened to The Intercept 3 hours ago, and I'm past it. But I want to be sleeping with her tonight or ever again. I'll have to make up some excuse, but I just can't do it. That is fine, Carl said soothingly. It might slow things down a bit, but people who cheat think they are smarter than everyone else. They believe they can hide their affair, but they are predictable and easy to track. I stayed silent. Hang in there, boss, Carl continued. You'll come out of this stronger no matter what. Yeah, I will, I replied, though I wasn't sure if I believed it yet. I couldn't believe it. All I could see ahead was a road of pain and embarrassment for both me and Lily. The thought of how this would impact her tore at my heart. Okay, Mark, call me if you need anything, even just to talk, Carl offered. I promised I would. After ending the call, I reactivated the Intercept equipment to catch any further communications between Emily and her lover. That night, I slept in the guest room telling Emily I had a sore throat and congestion that might make me snore. She agreed without much interest, returning to her magazine. I also mentioned being closer to Lily if she needed us, but Emily just shrugged, seemingly unconcerned about Lily's recent bedwetting, which had been an emotional issue for her. The next afternoon, Carl handed me a preliminary report. Emily's lover was Brian Collier, an accounting executive at her firm. Like Emily, he was a division supervisor. He was married with a 9-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter. His wife, Pamela, worked part-time as an insurance agent. Brian was 38, taller but leaner than me. I had boxed as an amateur in my teens and still lifted weights occasionally. In the one photo Carl found, Mr. Collier looked more like a runner than an athlete. Some might find him attractive, but I struggled to see what drew Emily to break our vows for him. Carl had bribed a contact at the phone company to obtain 2 years' worth of Emily's phone records. A quick analysis showed a few initial calls between them, increasing to weekly about 6 months ago and now daily, often at night or early morning. They frequently talked after I left for work or when I was in the basement lifting weights. Do you know what happened around the time the calls spiked? Carl asked, his businesslike tone making it slightly easier to bear. I leaned back, thinking. She went to a training seminar in Chicago a couple of weeks before the calls increased. I remember taking her to the airport and Brian was there, getting on the same flight. That seminar might be where it all started, Carl said. Too many coincidences for my taste. I don't believe in coincidences either, I agreed. Carl checked his notepad. That's it for now. We've got digital copies of all her credit card activity from the past year, thanks to your joint accounts. We'll also check your bank records today and let you know what we find. I was amazed at the amount of information they had gathered in just 2 days. How did you get all that without my direct authorization, I asked, wondering if I should confront the banks and phone companies about their lax security. Carl grinned. You authorized all of it, he said, seeing my confused expression. He chuckled, boss. You don't know what you're signing when Maggie hands you a stack of paperwork, huh? I had to smile and nod. I used to trust Maggie almost as much as Emily. Now Maggie was the only one I could trust. Okay, I said, raising my hands in mock surrender. Go forth and do battle with the bad guys and girls. By Thursday, Carl and his team had compiled a massive amount of information about Emily and Brian. 2 investigators sent to Chicago found several people who remembered Emily and Brian being very close during the seminar. A desk clerk thought they were married until noticing their different surnames. Several hotel staff recalled them as frequent visitors to the lounge, often stumbling to their rooms early in the morning after heavy drinking. The lounge manager even had to ask them to tone down their risque behavior twice. Carl-S. investigators were negotiating with the hotel to see if security camera tapes were still available and could be obtained for a fee, possibly involving a discreet under-the-table payment. A freelance operative began working at Emily's office earlier than planned and reported that Brian and Emily were openly an item. Their mutual boss knew about the affair and had warned them to keep it out of the workplace. Emily had already missed out on a promotion due to poor performance linked to her conduct. I noted this for my attorney. as it suggested the company didn't strictly enforce its morals clauses. The freelancer working in payroll had already obtained copies of Emily and Mr. Collier's pay records, along with their time and attendance logs. It appeared they were taking off 1 or 2 afternoons a week for their rendezvous. The credit card data showed that Brian Collier was a cheapskate Emily paid for most of the motel rooms on the outskirts of town, highlighting the tawdry nature of their affair. Emily's group of friends she claimed to meet at night mostly comprised single or recently divorced women looking for new relationships. Although Emily had sworn them to secrecy, all but one, Kathy, were quick to provide details to the investigators for a 100 bribe. They gave dates, places, and times of Emily and Brian's meetings. Most of these women hadn't seen Emily in 2 months. Kathy, however, immediately called Emily after being questioned, claiming she hadn't revealed anything. Kathy was furious, thinking it unreasonable and spiteful for me to check on Emily. She suspected it was me. Kathy had a history of involvement in such matters, having been divorced twice for infidelity. She had a reputation for seducing married men and had been named in several divorce cases, despite not working in the same building as the others. Somehow, Kathy had joined Emily's group and seemed to be encouraging the affair. Carl had cloned Emily's cell phone, ensuring the 100 bribes kept the other women quiet. They reassured Emily that they hadn't divulged anything, and she only knew someone was asking questions but believed her friends were protecting her secret. I was amazed at how much detailed information Carl's team had gathered so quickly. Brian and Emily were amateurs. While Carl was a seasoned pro, they didn't stand a chance. The rest of that week and the following 2 were quiet at home. Emily canceled all but her Friday night outings, and Carl's agents confirmed that the group went to clubs, danced with anyone who asked, and then went home. Brian stayed home with his family, and one report suggested his wife wasn't thrilled about his sudden change of routine. I was surprised at how short-lived the effect of the investigators questioning the group had been. It seemed that Emily and Brian were arrogant enough to think they could continue as usual. 3 weeks after the investigators contacted Emily's Friday night group, the intercepted cell phone conversations became more frequent and explicit. Emily and Brian thought the storm had passed and that I was none the wiser. During this time, I moved almost entirely into the guest bedroom. I could barely bring myself to kiss Emily on the cheek and avoided any physical intimacy despite her subtle hints. I read every book in Lily's collection and bought more for us to share. I developed a harsh, dry cough, which served as my excuse for sleeping away from Emily, who didn't question it. Carl's team noticed the late-night calls between Emily and Brian had increased. On the 3rd Wednesday, they arranged to meet at their usual cheap motel. Carl's team was ready to catch them, and my attorney, Pete, had prepared me for the inevitable confrontation. That evening, I arranged for Mandy, a 16-year-old neighbor, to babysit Lily. "Emily," I said, standing in the living room as she was about to leave, "please Don to go out tonight." My voice was sincere, pleading. "Please, Emily," I begged, genuinely not wanting her to go through with it. "Mark," she snapped, then softened her tone. "Look, nothing's going on. I'm just going out for drinks and maybe some dancing. That is all," she insisted, giving me a convincing look. She hugged me, trying to reassure me. "Emily," I said impulsively, "I know you're meeting someone tonight. You can demean as much to him as you do to Lily and me. Please, Don, to go." She pulled back, suspicion in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked indignantly, her acting skills on full display. "I just know," I insisted. "You're cheating on me and Lily, and it's not fair." She relaxed slightly, thinking I only had suspicions. "I'm not cheating on you," she said firmly. "I'm tired of these accusations. Keep this up, and I might just find someone to take care of my needs." I looked away, hiding my sudden rage. "Emily," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, not another word. "Look, I've never cheated on you. I am not cheating on you now, and I never will. Does that satisfy you?" she retorted angrily. She walked to the door, putting on a light jacket. I noticed she wasn't wearing a bra and saw no panty lines under her miniskirt. "Emily," I said more calmly, "if you ever cheat on me, it's over. Remember what we talked about when Georgia and Sam broke up last year?" Her hand paused on the doorknob for a moment. "I told you," she said, her voice controlled but condescending. "I swear I don't want any man but you, and I never will." She turned to leave. "Now I am late and have to go," she added firmly, without looking back, as she opened the door and walked out. 20 minutes later, I joined Carl and 3 of his best operatives in the room next to where Brian and Emily would soon arrive. Spooked by my protests and the questioning of Emily's friends, Brian and Emily were driving around aimlessly, trying to see if they were being followed. The GPS devices confirmed that no one was tailing them. Carl knew of the motel reservation almost immediately because the desk clerk had been paid to inform us. Since we knew their destination, there was no need for a tail. If necessary, Carl would have used several cars to follow them without being noticed, aided by the GPS devices in their cars. Shortly after I arrived, Emily and Brian pulled up to the motel almost simultaneously and parked in front of room 113. They didn't notice the dark van across the street recording their every move. They embraced and kissed passionately, oblivious to the camera. Carl watched me closely, knowing I wanted to storm out and confront them. "Mark," he said quietly, "it's going to get worse. Can you handle this?" I sat down on one of the beds, my lips suddenly dry. "Do you have anything to drink?" I asked. Carl misunderstood and shook his head. "Take this Valium," he said, offering a small yellow tablet. "It'll help calm your nerves." I accepted it and grabbed a soda from the cooler he had brought. Carl had hidden a high-end digital camera in the room's air conditioning vent. It had full color, a wide range of motion, and a 25x zoom for detailed footage, though Carl didn't expect such detail to be necessary. Once the duo went inside, things escalated quickly. As suspected, Emily wore no underwear and was out of her dress in seconds. Brian followed suit, and they fell onto the bed. We turned off our room's lights, and 2 of Carl's men positioned fiber optic cameras to capture everything. Carl's team set up 2 tiny cameras, one under the door and another over the top. These miniature devices, less than a quarter-inch in diameter, slid easily through the gaps. They taped the transmitters to the outside wall, ensuring they were nearly invisible by unscrewing a nearby light bulb. The receivers were already connected to the monitors and recording equipment, allowing us to watch discreetly. With 3 cameras in place, we were confident nothing would go unnoticed. The footage was disappointingly straightforward. There was no affection or tenderness. Brian simply put on a yellow condom and went through the motions. Watching Emily's face, I couldn't tell if she was in pain or pleasure. "Unbelievable," I muttered after a minute. "That guy isn't any better endowed than me, actually. He is smaller." Emily had often commented on my size, jokingly calling for her big tool when we were intimate. Brian, however, was clearly less endowed and had to work hard to bring Emily any satisfaction. His technique was rough and unrefined. What did she see in him? My pride felt a slight twinge of recovery when Jessica, one of Carl's agents, glanced at my lap, then at the screen, shaking her head with a smirk. There was a hint of curiosity in her eyes before we both looked away. Jessica was attractive, and while I had no intentions of mixing business with personal matters, the thought crossed my mind that there might be an opening for a new partner in the future. After enduring the footage, I left. There was nothing more to see. Brian and Emily were amateurs playing a dangerous game. The following week, they couldn't meet due to conflicting schedules, which left them both frustrated. Then Kathy, a so-called friend of Emily's, suggested a weekend getaway to Las Vegas. The investigators had dug up quite a bit on Kathy, revealing her as a manipulative woman estranged from her family due to past infidelities. In a monitored call, Kathy elaborated on her idea, telling Emily she had won 2 free tickets to Vegas and inviting her along. It was clear Kathy intended for them to find new partners in Vegas, mentioning she had bought 24 condoms. Emily agreed but invited Brian, throwing a wrench in Kathy's plans. Kathy was upset but didn't object when she learned Brian was joining, although he complained about having to pay his own way, revealing his cheap nature. Pete, my attorney, planned to subpoena Kathy. She knew both Emily and Brian were married and had actively facilitated the affair by setting up the Vegas trip. Pete doubted we could recover any money from her, or that the lawsuit would progress far, but he intended to scare her enough to prevent her from meddling in other marriages. We debated whether to confront Emily with the motel footage or wait until the Vegas trip. I was eager to end the charade immediately and start divorce proceedings, but Pete advised giving them more rope to hang themselves. The out-of-town trip, with its deceit, would be more incriminating, especially if Emily blatantly disregarded our marriage vows. Pete's plan was to catch her beyond the point of no return, and it worked. The investigators booked a room at the same casino hotel as Kathy, Brian, and Emily. Carl's team was stationed in a room with a perfect view into the Trio's suite, secured with a hefty bribe. Carl's cameras were ready to capture any incriminating activity. People often feel invisible in high-rise buildings, not realizing how easily they can be observed. Even if they closed the blinds, Carl's team had a laser device that could capture sound vibrations from the window, ensuring clear audio for court. They also planned to record a phone conversation. I was to call Emily and make a final plea for her to return, following a script Pete had prepared, though I secretly hoped it might sway her. I felt a wave of intense emotions, alternating between anger and despair. I was physically ill, having been unable to eat all day. Carl's team left me at home, but I had a clear view through the cameras they set up. A detective watched them nearly drain the flight attendant's supply of mini bottles as they flew to Vegas. They were already quite drunk by the time they landed. "Emily," I said into the phone, watching the live feed. On the webcam, I saw Emily on her hands and knees on the bed with Brian behind her. She twisted around to grab the phone from the nightstand, while Kathy seemed to enjoy the spectacle. "Please, honey, don't sleep with that man," I pleaded, almost slipping and saying his name. I had to pretend I didn't know it. "Come home to me, babe, please. We can work something out." I tried to sound coaxing, as Pete had advised, to highlight Emily's betrayal. "Emily, think of Lily. Think of what breaking our marriage will do to her. It is shocking how long a person can hold on to hope, even when witnessing something that utterly shatters them." I had loved Emily deeply and desperately hoped for some sign that the woman I knew was still there, but there was none. At that moment, I might have still loved her, but I didn't like her at all. She solidified my dislike immediately. "Screw you!" Emily screamed into the phone. "I have told you before, you paranoid jerk. I am not sleeping with anyone else. I have had it with your damn suspicions." I shook my head at the sheer audacity of her lies. How could she say that while being intimate with another man right in front of me? When I hung up, I was stunned by her blatant dishonesty. She moved closer to Kathy and Brian, who were now fooling around with each other, seemingly unconcerned about her blatant infidelity. "But I'll tell you this, sweetheart," Emily continued, her voice dripping with malice. "I might just pick up some random guy tonight and bring him to my room. How's that, honey? Would you like that? I'll do it just so you can finally be right about something. How would that be, dear?" I was floored by her vindictiveness. This was the same woman who had clung to me for comfort just a year ago when her favorite aunt passed away. I remembered Emily as a gentle presence, someone I could turn to with any problem, and a caring lover, especially after Lily was asleep. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking, "I don't know what else to say. I don't understand why you are doing this. Think about what you were doing to Lily, for God's sake." Emily cut me off with another angry scream. "Go to hell and take her with you," she shouted, nearly incoherent. I only understood her because I could see her lips on the monitor. "When I get home, we're going to have this out. You will be lucky if I don't leave your sorry ass. Got that?" She screamed more incomprehensible things before stabbing the off button on the phone and tossing it aside. She staggered back to the bed, motioning for Brian to continue. By Sunday morning, Carl and his team had dismantled the operation, packed up the equipment, and headed home, exhausted. We had gathered more evidence, videos, photos, phone transcripts, and financial records than my attorney, Pete, could handle. He was overwhelmed but planned to file for divorce by noon on Monday. He would have 6 months to go through the material before the state finalized the divorce. We had clear video of Emily being intimate with Brian while yelling obscenities at me and our daughter, right after assuring me she wasn't doing such things. This footage was captured legally through an open window, making it admissible in court. We also included clips from my home surveillance system showing Emily S. indifference to Lily S. well-being. One video showed Emily leaving as Lily ran down the stairs. Another depicted her snapping at Lily for no apparent reason, and another caught Emily telling Lily to make her own breakfast because she didn't have time. This mountain of evidence was compiled and presented to a judge early Monday morning. The judge granted a temporary restraining order, giving me full custody until the family court could make a permanent decision. Another order barred Emily from contacting Lily in any form until the case was reviewed. Several other motions were granted almost without question. It's impressive how quickly things can move when a wealthy and influential man, well, I was helping my attorney become even wealthier, pushes things along. Monday mornings at the accounting firm were usually slow, with many staff members recovering from weekend partying. Some employees loitered around waiting for the heavy drinkers to pull themselves together. Just after lunch, a large man in a gray suit entered the office. A few hopeful women glanced his way as he walked down the aisles, but he showed no interest. He kept glancing at a photograph in his hand while looking directly at each woman he passed. After a brief search, he found his target. Emily was speaking quietly to a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 40s and a shorter, slimmer man who seemed to cling to her. Emily appeared uncomfortable, trying to distance herself from the smaller man. Her eyes were dark and troubled, clearly preoccupied with something haunting her. "Emily Archer?" the large man asked in a deep, rumbling voice, approaching the group unnoticed. Emily turned and nodded, clearly unhappy. Something heavy weighed on her, and it showed. The man pulled a thick envelope from his inside coat pocket. "You, madam," he announced loudly, ensuring everyone around could hear, "are served." He paused for effect, ensuring he had everyone's attention. He set his briefcase on a nearby desk and began pulling out legal documents printed on onion skin paper, backed with thicker baby blue sheets. "This," he declared to a stunned Emily, "is a copy of the divorce petition filed this morning. Mr. Mark Archer intends to divorce you as soon as possible." He handed her another set of papers. "This, madam, is a court order prohibiting you from coming within 1,000 feet of the residence you once shared with Mr. Archer." He added another document to the pile in her trembling hands. "This is a temporary restraining order forbidding you from contacting Mr. Archer's daughter, Lily Rose Archer, in any way. You may not call, email, write, or attempt to speak to Miss Archer. Is that clear, madam?" Emily nodded numbly, not sure what else to do. The look of horror on her face was evident to everyone around as a crowd began to gather. "Mr. Archer," the man continued, "wants you to know that all your joint account credit cards were canceled 2 hours ago. Your joint checking and savings accounts with your former husband have also been closed. This check," he said, holding up a cashier's check disdainfully by one corner, "represents 50 of the total amount in the former joint accounts." He added it to the stack of paperwork in Emily's hands. "Mr. Archer also wants me to inform you that all your clothing and personal possessions are being packed and will be loaded into a truck now. As for your belongings," the large man continued, "they will be placed in storage and made available for pickup at a location of your choosing. You may communicate your wishes through Mr. Archer's attorney at the number provided on this card." He handed her a business card without a hint of sympathy. "You are not permitted to enter the residence you once shared with Mr. Archer under any circumstances. The locks have been changed and the security system codes updated." He scanned the room, his gaze settling on the slender man attempting to blend into the crowd. "Brian Collier," he called out loudly, freezing Brian in his tracks. "No need to rush off." The man produced another envelope from his briefcase, handing it to Brian with a mocking smile. "You, sir, are served. Congratulations. You're named as a co-respondent in the case of Archer versus Archer." He pulled out yet another bundle of documents. "And you are also the defendant in a civil lawsuit filed by Mr. Mark Archer. accusing you of willfully and maliciously interfering in the marriage of Mark and Emily Archer, and for engaging in an affair with Mrs. Archer. Brian S.'s face paled, and he grabbed onto a nearby desk to steady himself. My attorney had anticipated such a dramatic scene. The big man, unfazed, then approached Emily S.'s supervisor. "You are hereby notified of a suit filed this morning," he announced, demanding damages for failing to enforce the company's morality clauses with regard to all employees at the mid-level and above. He handed another set of papers to the senior vice president, who had been aware of the affair from the beginning. Standing in the back of the room, I felt a chilling numbness. My face remained a stern, unforgiving mask. I watched in silence as the process server completed his task. I had arranged for him to deliver the check and other documents personally to Emily, wanting to witness her reaction. The realization of her complete downfall spread across Emily S.'s face as she collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I turned away, walking through the double doors without a word. Later, I saw my soon-to-be ex-wife enter the dimly lit conference room. I sat at the head of the long table near the windows, where the bright light kept my face in shadow, making it hard for her to see me clearly. I lounged back in a large executive chair, feigning relaxation, a facade I had perfected. "I wanted to see you before all the legal proceedings started," Emily said hesitantly, pulling out a chair and sitting a few feet away. It had been almost 4 months since she lost her job and moved in with her brother. Her once neatly styled brunette hair had grown out, and she looked gaunt, as if she hadn't been eating or sleeping well. The dark circles under her eyes told their own story. My heart ached for her, but I maintained my CEO demeanor, an expression I reserved for difficult negotiations. It was a cold, unyielding look. "And now you're here," I said quietly. She nodded, avoiding my gaze. Finally, she gathered the courage to look directly at me. "Mark," she began softly, "I want to start by apologizing for everything I have done to you and Lily." I remained silent, my expression unchanged. "I know it doesn't make up for the pain I've caused, but it's all I can say," she whispered. "I am suffering too, Mark. I can't understand why I did what I did, and it is driving me insane." She paused, struggling to continue. "I beg to differ," I interrupted calmly. "You haven't begun to suffer until you've told a 3-year-old that her mother might never come home." Emily broke down, her sobs quiet but intense. It's been 4 months since I had to tell her that, and she still cries herself to sleep most nights. Only recently have I managed to coax an occasional smile from her. I paused, watching Emily, who was hunched over in her chair, crying. "She screams and clings to me whenever I have to leave her for any length of time," I continued. "She's terrified that I want to come back. Can you even imagine that kind of fear in a little girl who's not even 4 years old, Emily? Can you?" I leaned back in my chair, forcing myself to remain composed, as Emily wept uncontrollably. "She is enrolled in a new daycare center here at the corporate campus," I added. "I told her I built it so I'd never be more than a few minutes away. Any longer, and she panics when she can see me." Emily continued to cry, seemingly oblivious to my words. "But on a positive note," I added with forced cheerfulness, "productivity among single parents here has improved, and the facility has almost paid for itself." My attempt at lightening the mood had no effect on her. Letting the silence linger, I finally asked, "Why? Why did you do it, Emily?" "I loved you more than life itself," I began, my voice trembling with the weight of my emotions, "and you ripped the soul right out of me. There's a gaping emptiness inside me now, Emily, and I can't even begin to heal until I understand why you did this." She shook her head, letting tears stream down her cheeks. She hadn't bothered with makeup, probably anticipating the tears. She was still beautiful, perhaps even more so now at 30 than when we first married. My heart broke watching her cry. I wanted to break down and cry too. I'd lost a younger brother in a car accident as a teenager, but today I felt more miserable and just as helpless. I didn't know if this ache would ever heal. "I don't know why," she finally said after a long silence. "I think I might be losing my mind." She was quiet for a moment, then continued. "I can't undo what I've done, Mark," she whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I want to ask for it." Her voice was barely audible. "I've hurt the only man I have ever loved so deeply, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. I don't know what to do about it." She paused, staring blankly at the ceiling as tears continued to flow. "I want to die when I think about what I've done to our sweet little girl," she said, her voice cracking. "Replaying that night in my head, hearing myself scream at you to take her to hell with you." She broke off, her gaze vacant and distant. For a moment I considered using the remote beside me to play the DVD in the corner, not needing to fast forward to find the scene of her drunk and unclothed, damning our daughter to hell. But it felt unnecessary. She knew it all too well. After a while, her tears slowed and stopped, probably because she was too dehydrated to cry anymore. I put the remote back in a drawer of the nearby credenza. "I am seeing a counselor, a psychologist," she said slowly, her fingers nervously intertwining. "I'm trying to understand why I destroyed our lives and hurt so many people." She paused again, then said, "I went to see Stacy Collier." She looked down at her hands. "I apologize for what I did to her family. She was kind to me, surprisingly. I don't know why." Emily stared at the grain of the heavy tabletop, lost in thought. "Stacy told me that Brian always found some woman wherever he worked. She got used to it, but this time she had enough. She divorcing Brian and moving on. She found a good man who loves her children, and she says he is the best thing that ever happened to her. I knew Stacy Collier was divorcing her husband and about the new man in her life, but I hadn't known Emily had gone to Stacy to apologize. It hinted at remorse and a willingness to take responsibility for her actions. Something hopeful stirred inside me, wondering if it could survive and grow. "What is the counselor telling you?" I asked. Emily glanced at me, then quickly looked back at the table. "We haven't made much progress," she admitted. "I wish I could say we had, but all I know is that something changed when I started drinking heavily." She paused, then continued, "Were you confused, Emily?" I interrupted, trying to understand. She looked up and met my gaze for the first time, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "Maybe the first time I was really drunk." She stopped, swallowing hard. "The first time I slept with Brian, I was drunk," she said, dropping her head again. "But I wasn't dazed, and sometimes I wasn't even drunk after that," she confessed, struggling to control her sobs. "I wish I could use that as an excuse, but I am trying to find the real reasons with my counselor." She fell silent for a while, then resumed speaking when I shifted in my chair. "Mark," she said, lifting her chin and raising her eyebrows in a questioning look, "would you go see her? She wants to talk to you not about what you think, but to ask some questions to see if there is anything I haven't been able to tell her." Emily's words tumbled out quickly, as if trying to say everything before I could refuse. "I suppose," I said simply. Emily stared at me, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You will go?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope. I shrugged. "I am still your husband," I replied somberly. "I'll do what I can to help you, as long as it doesn't hurt our child." I almost said my child, but caught myself. A flicker of hope sparked in her eyes, growing brighter. I wanted to say something harsh, to remind her that there was no real chance of reconciliation, but I stopped. I was willing to explore any avenue that might be in our little girl's best interests. I had loved Emily without reservation, and I still loved her. Love isn't something you can turn on and off like a faucet, but love couldn't overcome the deep sense of betrayal I felt. We were on our way to a divorce, and that was our fate. It took 6 months, and then it was finally over. I didn't prevent my ex-wife from visiting our daughter, neither during the divorce nor afterward. Emily tried multiple times to reconcile, but it was not what I wanted. The ordeal was too much for me, and I had to seek counseling. It helped me a lot. I reduced my work hours to spend more time with Lily. A year later, Emily left town and married an accountant. Our daughter was part of their new family. I was invited to the wedding but decided not to go. I never married again, dedicating my life to raising Lily.